Well, hello and welcome. We're live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. Now, throughout the show and throughout the week, you can interact with us on our various social media platforms, including at The Week Ahead or using the hashtag The Week Ahead. Let's get straight into it. At our top story at this hour, Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter says that the power utility will be purchasing additional power from the private sellers as of tomorrow. Eskom announced stage 6 load shedding in the early hours of this morning. The power utility says this follows the tripping of a generating unit each at Kusile and Krill power stations. While speaking at the power utility's media briefing, de Ruyter has again appealed for electricity to be used sparingly as the power utility battles to keep the lights on.
We did have an urgent board meeting yesterday, also with Minister Bourdon in attendance, and we discussed further steps to be taken. Tomorrow we will be approaching the market to procure whatever megawatts are available on an urgent basis. So we think that we can get about 1,000 megawatts from available generation capacity that we can tap into. Not all of that, of course, is immediately available. Some of it relies on suppliers having to replenish their coal bunkers or secure additional gas supply. But in the case of IPPs, we have a very high degree of confidence that we can urgently procure more megawatts. There may be a question as to the implementation of the presidential task team's recommendations, which the president announced on the 25th of July. The National Electricity Crisis Committee, which consists of a number of ministers, has been operating very well. We've received a lot of support. There are 8 work streams identified that are functioning well under the project management of Operation Mandela and the presidency. So we're getting very good support there. But unfortunately, implementing these recommendations will take time. So the procurement, for example, of further large-scale generation capacity will take a considerable period of time. In the interim, we would really wish to appeal to South Africa to use electricity as sparingly as possible. I've already requested municipalities in South Africa to assess where they have non-critical loads that can be switched off. For example, it is very often a case that due to faulty switches or faulty timers, that streetlights are burning during the daytime, and if our colleagues in the municipalities can please assist us in ensuring that we avoid any unnecessary load on the system to the extent possible.
Right, for more, we're going to be bringing in energy expert Ted Blom. Ted, good afternoon. I dare say good afternoon, in fact, given what's happening. But thank you for joining us on the SABC. Perhaps on the back of what Andre de Ruyter echoed this morning at the 10 o'clock briefing, I think it's only befitting that we take a look at the realities that South Africans will be facing. And perhaps you can contextualize, what stage 6 ultimately is and how it is going to affect us going forward.
Good day to you. Yes, I mean, stage 6 is certainly disastrous for this economy and for most people in the country, insofar as that on a Sunday, we've now had 5 hours of load shedding. And I mean, if this continues on into the week, it's just impossible to run an economy or to run a business. So this will impact eventually on the GDP numbers for the country. And then you'll see it also in the results of the matriculants that are trying to study for exams, etc., etc. And the more job losses, the more company closures and factory closures. So, and the mines have already stopped producing because at level 4 load shedding, it's not safe for the mines to send people underground anymore as far as underground mining is concerned. So really, this brings the country to a standstill. And then one must deliberate as to, what has gone wrong? Why has the big picture fallen over the precipice? And if we want to go into that argument, you need to look at the statistics and see that from 2017, when we had no load shedding and very minimal diesel usage, less than 1 month of the current consumption, we've gone downhill all the way with the new board being appointed. We were incompetent at the time anyway, and they've now had 4 or 5 years to sort of educate themselves, but they don't seem to have done a good job at that. As well as a new leadership that has been appointed at Eskom, made grand promises, but has been vacillating. I've never seen somebody vacillate so much between different answers and alternatives in my life. And that's why I called at the time for somebody with experience to be appointed to lead us through these deep and dark waters.
All right, Ted, you've touched on quite a few points. I want to break it down just so that the public can obviously get to really understanding the magnitude of the crisis that they're going to be facing. Let's start off with the fact that Eskom says it will be purchasing additional power from private sellers as of tomorrow. How is this going to impact the consumer already given its current price structure?
Well, I mean, I don't think there are many people floating around with extra power to give away or sell. And Eskom typically has been very stingy on the buy-in prices or the feed-in tariffs. They've also boasted, together with the president, that they're going to approach Botswana and Zambia for extra power. Botswana came back and said, well, we can offer you maybe 50 megawatts on a weekend, but we need all our other power to keep our economy going. And to ask Zambia for power is actually a joke, because they're in a similar crisis, which has been induced by the Eskom shortfalls, which they were reliant on Eskom supply for the last probably best part of 50 years. So it seems to me that the powers that be are making all these alternative options and offers don't actually know what's going on the ground. In fact, they're hoping that they can get power, but in the same voice they say, well, it won't happen immediately. The fact of the matter is that the whole organization is in disarray. They're very poorly prepared. They should have been prepared since 2008 when they ran out of coal, again due to bribery and corruption. And it seems to me that at some of the power stations, a similar scenario is playing itself out on top of the technical breakdowns that they've been complaining about. So, yes, at the end of the day, one needs to say that you can't have the same things happening over and over and over and over and over for 3 years or nearly 3 years under the new management. Forget about the old management and not have any different answers. I mean, I think it's Einstein that said, if you do the same things and expect a different outcome, you must be insane.
Yes, it definitely was a sign of madness, according to him. And so as we look at the way forward, perhaps actually just last week in Parliament, the Deputy President informed us that Eskom is managing and is improving its efficiency and transparency processes. There are no plans to privatize Eskom as well. But obviously, when it comes to performance, we're seeing that the stages and the load shedding keeps on increasing. The situation has escalated, and it happens on such short notice. It's the second time that stage 6 is also happening. What is the end in mind, given the billions that have been spent on the construction of Kusile and other power plants, as well as, the energy plan that our very own president spoke about back in July?
Well, the fact of the matter is the politicians can talk as much as they want to, but it's primarily through their interference, going right back to 2001, when Eskom was made a state entity or state-owned enterprise, where previously it was autonomously run and directed by the large energy users who had a stake in keeping the lights on and the power cheap. The politicians cannot exonerate themselves from this mess. They are fairly and squarely to blame for this mess. On top of it, the appointments at Eskom have also let us down. And I sat with Eskom senior management more than 3 years ago, and I saw the lights going out, and I said to them, we've got an emergency plan. Here's the emergency plan. We can bring in 1 gigawatt every 3 weeks by flying in emergency power. This same team that I was partnered up with brought electricity to Beira, who lost its key power station due to that explosion at the harbour. They brought power back to Beira within 7 days. These guys have got a track record of delivering. But Eskom doesn't want to, if anything doesn't involve their cronies, they're not actually interested in listening. So the senior people that I was engaged with delegated the matter to another senior manager, and his famous last words were, watch this space. Now, that's 3 years ago, and I'm still watching the space, and everything that Eskom has tried to do has been just nothing short of pathetic.
Well, it seems the space has been filled with more load shedding, and situations are obviously getting dire. So now you've spoken about the issue of leadership and management at Eskom. You've also spoken about how we continue to do, the same thing over and over. It might also shine a spotlight on what we're tolerating. So how does now the issue of accountability come into play from here into for Eskom and for the government, perhaps as we navigate the way forward?
Well, I think, and I want to allude to this because it seems to me everybody's missed the point. The fiduciary duty of Eskom's board and management is towards Eskom and Eskom's mission in this economy. And that is to run that thing as well as possible, as efficiently as possible, and as reliably as possible. Forget about quotas and all sorts of extraneous fossil fuel pacts with the global leaders, etc., etc. That is not part of the fiduciary duties of Eskom's management. That is political interference. And if the management of Eskom don't understand the difference between their fiduciary duty to the company and to the stakeholders of South Africa at large, they are in for a big shock, because I can foresee certain very serious legal litigation coming their way. They need to understand what the job entails. They need to understand that their loyalty is towards the company and the people, the stakeholders, not towards the politicians who vacillate towards every new feeding trough that's offered around the world.
Well, Ted, just as we conclude this conversation, we're obviously going to have to look at the impact that this is now going to have on consumers going forward, the impact of trade, the knock-on effects of the economy, which you alluded to earlier on. Given these sudden announcements, how does this also impact our position within the global market, even the rest of Africa? You've now also spoken about additional class lawsuits against government and Eskom, which is ultimately also pending given the damages experienced to date.
Okay, so the impact is just ginormous. I mean, it's very difficult. The official statistic is that load shedding costs us 100 Rand a kilowatt hour. My own estimate, given the disruption in your household of all the people that are affected directly and indirectly by the load shedding, is probably 5 to 8 times higher than the 100 Rand a kilowatt hour. The load shedding and the uncertain electricity situation over the last 12 years has resulted in more than 3 million jobs being shed, more than 70 smelters and foundries being closed. And of course, it's had a massive impact on the GDP. Our GDP should be growing at 6 to 8 to 10% a year. It's been fumbling around at negative numbers and less than 5%, certainly. It hasn't exceeded that. And we need at least 5% GDP growth per annum to just employ a new matrix coming into the marketplace every year. So no wonder we're sitting with record world levels of unemployment. And this is, until we hold the politicians responsible, and Eskom management in particular responsible for this disaster, we are not going to go forward. It's time for action. Time for talk is over.
Ted Blom, thank you very much for joining us here on the SABC and for that update. Again, on the back of, Eskom's CEO, Andre de Ruyter, informing us earlier on that the power utility will be purchasing additional power from private sellers as of tomorrow. Again, Eskom announcing stage 6 load shedding in the early hours of this morning, where the power utility says that it followed the tripping of a generating unit each at Kusile and Kriel power stations. Again, energy expert Ted Blom weighing in on the impact this is going to have for consumers for the week ahead, perhaps, and the next few months ahead. Again, thank you very much to him for his time. Let's leave the conversation there, take a quick ad break. There's more on the other side. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. We'll be right back. Right, welcome back. You're watching The Week Ahead with myself, Liesl Wilson. We continue now. South Africa will celebrate Heritage Day this coming week. The 24th of September, of course, recognizes and celebrates the cultural wealth of our nation. As South African citizens celebrate the day by remembering the cultural heritage of the many cultures that make up the population. Perhaps for this and more, we are going to bring in an academic and cultural expert, Professor Siawukele Ngubane, for more on this. Prof, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you for joining us on the SABC ahead of Heritage Day.
Good afternoon to you and your viewers at home.
Heritage Day has become a conversation starter for broader issues that South Africa and the continent perhaps is facing, given some of these socioeconomic dynamics and also ideologies that have pervaded society and influenced it to date. So I think to start this conversation, I want to look at Heritage Day and the way it has been celebrated to date. Perhaps as we are in 2022, does it still hold the weight it once held? What are some of the more important facts we're missing out when we commemorate this day annually?
Yes, I think the intention of the Heritage Day was to promote and commemorate our cultural traditions and our diverse communities. You know that prior to 1994, people were not allowed to reflect and express their own culture and religion and beliefs. And this time was set aside to promote that and encourage people to showcase their cultures, which is quite diverse, as part of nation building. I think the basis or the justification of Heritage Day is part of nation building. We have to understand the cultures of other people, understand their languages, understand their histories. But what is missing since it started in 1994 is that we see only part of the community who celebrate their cultures, and they celebrate their cultures alone. But the idea was to bring all groups together so that they can unite and fulfill the quest for social cohesion. But this is not happening so far.
Prof, you've actually touched on my next point, because you've spoken about nation building and social cohesion and the intention behind why it was started. And, previously it was known as Shaga's Day in KwaZulu-Natal, to celebrate King Shaka Zulu. So do you think the name change has had an influence in it being more counterproductive in terms of fostering social cohesion and unity? I'm asking this because, some portion of the population call it Braai Day.
Yes, I'll speak for the Zulu Nation to respond to this question, because the Zulu Nation were not affected by the change. They still consider 24 September as Shaga's Day, because this is what it has been all along, to remember King Shaka, who is the unifying factor for the Zulu people. So the name change did not affect the Zulu people per se, but people do understand that this is a commemoration day of the legendary King Shaka Kasenzangakhona kaJama, who played a vital role in uniting small tribes like our own clan, like Amabovu. This is my clan, Ngubane. They also they were conquered by King Shaka, and this is what we remember about him, because we are where we are as the Zulu Nation because of his efforts of uniting the Zulu Nation. So the purpose has changed when we moved to the democratic dispensation, whereby we wanted to strive and reach out to other racial groups and other cultures, because in the past we lived in a premise that our Zulu or African cultures were inferior to the Western culture. So this is the opportunity to remind ourselves that we belong to South Africa, and we have only one South Africa, although we are so diverse in terms of cultures and religious beliefs, but we are one. That's where I brought in the element of building the nation. So we can't build the nation without considering our history, because our history carries our identity and our ethnicity in South Africa. But we want to see people coming together as one.
Absolutely, and it also speaks to restoring our agency as a people. and you speak about understanding where you come from to, understand where you're headed to. And so this then definitely brings into focus the issue of indigenous knowledge systems and how we embrace it or how we fail to embrace it to date. What is the role of education, schools, universities, tertiary educations at large in fostering, these conversations and making sure that we encompass and embody and embrace what you've just alluded to?
There's a buzzword, decolonization, which emanates from this kind of discourse, where people want to go back to the roots and decolonize the minds from Western influence back to the ancient and African worldview. So the word decolonize means to Africanize what we feel is distinctive for our identity and for our cultures. So universities are trying by all means to Africanize knowledge so that we respect and recognize indigenous knowledge, because our forebears have lived many years, over decades, practicing this knowledge, and the knowledge that they have developed is still relevant to us in the current South Africa. So I think this is one way. The Heritage Month as a whole is one way of reminding us who we are and what the knowledge is we have been created, which we did not use and we did not respect, but now it is like we are being conscientized to remember the knowledge that existed, because I think that we as African people have enough knowledge to survive, since our forebears did survive with the knowledge they have. No,
absolutely, Prof. And that's why this is such an important, pertinent point that needs to be made. Just the very calendar that we even recognize. I mean, obviously, for universality, we use the Gregorian calendar, but there's obviously the African calendar, which is based on African astronomy, that even recognizes September as the new year, which we also see in other religions such as, Judaism, and other religions who followed the lunar calendar. And so in light of that, perhaps contextualize that for us. Why would spring be viewed as the new year in an African calendar based on African astronomy? What sort of practices would have ultimately also been adhered to? How can we start also practically going back to looking at, those kinds of aspects?
Africans believe in celestial bodies. They believe that in a year there are 2 seasons as opposed to 4 seasons. Even when we grew up, we knew that there was summer and there was winter. The spring and autumn is something that came about later in life, but the calendar was restricted to the activities in terms of cultivation, vegetation, and when they see changes of the nature, like trees changing their greenness and changing color, they knew exactly what should happen during these seasons. They know when to cultivate land and when to celebrate the first fruits. It was part of the calendar of the African people, more especially the Zulu people. They will rely on the annual activities. They believe that the year consists of 360 days, but within those days, they will know that during this month, this is what is happening. During this month, this is what we do. And then until they complete the whole calendar. And I think it is not by coincidence that the year starts in September, because according to the calendar, September is cultivation month, and also it is the beginning of a new moon. You know that we didn't have watches and other things in the past, but we relied on the sun and the moon. So when the moon is half, they know what is happening within that period. And the new and full moon is in September. I think that is why they considered September as the beginning of these two seasons.
There's so many more questions. So many, unanswered questions that I want to delve into, but for time's sake, I'm going to have to leave the conversation there. Thank you very much for joining us here on the SABC. It's going to be interesting to see how this conversation obviously, allows us to act beyond just talking. 2022 is quite a long time into the calendar. So it's interesting, and I want to thank you for being part of this discussion and helping us unlearn, learn, and relearn as we embrace and restore our agency as a people.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, South Africa will be celebrating Heritage Day this coming week. The 24th of September, as I mentioned earlier on, recognizes and really celebrates the cultural wealth of our nations. South Africa citizens celebrating the day by remembering cultural heritage of the many cultures that make up a population. We were in conversation with academic and cultural expert Professor Siyawukele Ngubane, who was just unpacking and explaining the significance of the day for all. Again, thank you to him for his time. We're going to leave it there for now. Take a quick break. We're going to be chatting to SABC International editor Sophie Mokoena on the other side, who unpacks what's going to happen ahead of the Queen's funeral that is set to take place tomorrow. We'll be right back.
Father's Day, when we were watching Simunyamara, we were dancing mobile had a room divider.
That's old. When men made us feel at home and 50-50 was just a show on TV.
That's because they were scared. Now we're learning lessons from the real bads on the estate and Guyani.
Hotspot Sally says mom just right for the weekend.
Paying our TV licenses keeps industries alive. Let's stay informed, educated, and entertained.
Telling stories for the now generation. tvlic.co.za.
Hypertension is one of the predominant risk factors for the development of several cardiovascular diseases.
I found out when I came here for my diabetes appointment, I didn't have any symptoms.
In our facility, the hypertension is very common. The cause is not yet known.
Due to the medication that you've been taking, we think one of the side effects is hypertension.
Hypertension is a silent killer.
Does have side effects because when I take the medication every day, I do shake a lot.
The medication works because my headache goes away.
Catch Vital Signs with me, Dr. Mosam Tombeni,
every Sunday morning between 5 and 6 a.m. on SABC News Channel.
All right, welcome back. The week ahead continues. Our people, on a somber note, are continuing to pay their last respects to British Queen Elizabeth II. Several world leaders will attend the Queen's funeral tomorrow.
She spoke at the UN General Assembly in 1957, again later in 2010. It was therefore befitting for the UN to pay tribute to the former UK head of state.
She acceded to the throne in a different age, the era of Churchill, Truman, Stalin, Mao and de Gaulle. A reassuring and inspiring presence, she was an anchor of stability across decades of often turbulent history.
Her reign started at the time when colonialism was fading.
The first part of a remarkable reign saw many nations gaining independence from Britain, and the formation of the Commonwealth, a diverse multilateral group. Commonwealth members are among the most steadfast supporters of the United Nations, and we mourn with them also today.
She visited South Africa after the fall of the apartheid government.
Mr. Premier, Prince Philip and I are most grateful for the heartwarming welcome that you and the people of Gauteng have extended to us during this visit. may I ask you, Mr. Premier, to convey our thanks to the people of Soweto, who also greeted us so memorably this morning. I was honoured to unveil the memorial to the victims of the SS Mende at the Avalon Cemetery. It reminds us that South Africa's contribution in both world wars was in part the key to ensuring the final victory.
Some say she didn't do enough to address the scars and legacy of colonialism.
The British royal family has been deeply implicated in the colonization and conquest of Africa. Of course, Queen Elizabeth II came into power some 50 years after the death of Queen Victoria. She came into power in 1953 and Queen Victoria died in 1901. But Queen Elizabeth was not prepared, these are Churchill's words, to preside over the liquidation of the empire.
Many heads of state and government will attend the funeral in London. Sophie Mugwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Look, for more, we are going to bring in SABC International News Editor Sophie Mugwena to unpack further. Very good afternoon to you, Sophie. Thank you for joining us again. I think it's only befitting as we look at the state funeral that's set to take place at Westminster Abbey on Monday. And it's been touted as one of the biggest ceremonial events to hit Britain since World War II. What can we expect ahead of the funeral tomorrow?
Well, we saw the visuals of leaders arriving in United Kingdom, in London specifically, and therefore we expect a number of heads of state and government from different parts of the world to attend. But of course, mainly will be people from UK or leaders from UK, and also you will have heads of state and government from the Commonwealth. You know that the Queen is the head of the Commonwealth, and therefore this organization is one organization where you expect leaders of that organization to come and say farewell to the Queen. We know that many people have arrived. I mean, if one has to mention the President of the United States of America, after meeting President Cyril Ramaphosa on Friday, Saturday he left Washington and he arrived yesterday in London, and therefore he is going to be there. And you also have those countries that were not invited. For example, a country like Russia, Afghanistan, and other countries that perhaps there are no relations, like Syria, with the United Kingdom, and therefore it is indeed a big one. As you can see, the president has arrived. He arrived 2 hours ago, and he is going to join other heads of states later tonight during the dinner that will be hosted by the King, and also he is going to be joined by members of his family, particularly Harry and William, to receive the guest. And I think yesterday the highlight was the appearance of Harry again, and for the first time he was wearing full military uniform. As you know that he is a trained soldier. When it started, he didn't wear the military uniform, but he had his medals. And I think as they were discussing as the family, they came to a conclusion that they can wear their uniform, the same with Prince Andrew. I think so that people can see that the family is united. The King did set a tone on the day he presented his first public appearance and speaking, saying that he loves both Harry and Meghan. And therefore, it looks like it's all systems go for tomorrow.
Well, this is definitely a story that you'll be monitoring quite closely tomorrow. But you've touched on a point about our very own President Cyril Ramaphosa having arrived in London about 2 hours ago. Given what is currently transpiring in South Africa, how is this coming across? How would you weigh in on that?
Well, South Africans are angry. You cannot underestimate the anger right now. I think the president has himself to blame. I mean, the ESCOM management has failed. The ESCOM board has failed to resolve this crisis. And therefore, the delay is damaging in terms of perhaps taking a decision how you capacitate or strengthen the ESCOM management or the board so that they can deliver. The reality is this will have an impact. In 2024, we saw what happened recently during the elections, that ANC did suffer a lot based on the rolling blackouts. And if this is continuing, I mean, we didn't even anticipate. You wake up, stage 6, no one can be happy about that kind of a situation. And therefore, I think when he comes back in South Africa, that will be probably Wednesday, unless he decides to cut his visit short abroad, because from London, he has to go to the United Nations. You know that on Tuesday, he is supposed to address the UN and then fly out to South Africa as soon as he's done. And I think on arrival, the first thing in his diary should be convening perhaps that war room, if it's still there, or a committee that was appointed to assist him to look at this crisis. But the other issue is, you have the Deputy President of the Republic, Didi Mabuza. Didi, where are you? Because you were given responsibility to look at these SOEs. You were given specific task to look at ESCOM. Where is the statement? The president had to release a statement abroad, and he is acting president. Didi Mabuza is currently acting president. Where is the acting president? So I think the issue of leadership during critical times, during crisis, it's something that the ANC as the governing party will have to look at. But sometimes, you know, we often say a leader is as good as those around him, because a leader can't think, can't resolve every problem. And that is why you have advisors, political advisor, international relations advisor, economic advisors. Yes. These are the people, including from the party level, that has to assist in terms of what needs to be done with this crisis. And with ESCOM even saying we are likely to continue with this stage 6. It's a disaster.
Well, speaking of leadership and crisis management, this is also going to come to the fore as King Charles has now officially, come to the helm of the throne. And it's going to definitely impact Africa. And I wonder how you would also weigh in on that. What can we then look forward to during his reign in relation to Africa?
When he spoke, he pointed out that there's not much that he is going to do, because he's also quite senior, and therefore the status quo will remain in terms of what's happening in the United Kingdom and the monarchy. But he is hoping, I think, that the son, Prince William, when he takes over the reins at that time where he will take over the reign, we don't know when. You would imagine how long he waited to be in this position himself, King Charles. And therefore, he's not saying anything new, but he's got strong relationship with Africa. You know that he was on the continent only last year. He was representing the Queen at the Commonwealth Summit in Rwanda. He has visited many countries on the continent. Also very warm to the royal family in KwaZulu-Natal. I'm talking about the late King Goodwill Zwelithini, and we saw yesterday King Misizulu issuing a statement and even indicating that when the king passed on, they did receive a message from the royal family. And therefore, he does have a relationship, but it cannot be business as usual. As you watch that crown, the controversial crown, it speaks to how Africans are still aggrieved in terms of the scars and the impact of colonialism. Others even saying the crown must come back, and others are saying sell the crown, give proceeds of the crown to those countries where these diamonds were taken, particularly South Africa, that white big diamond in Cullinan, and also the other one from India. And therefore, it will be a sign that you are saying it can't be business as usual, and you accept that this is a different time at all.
Absolutely. I think in conclusion, as we look at what we can expect in terms of proceedings and the official program, do we know what that's going to look like? How will things unfold as we know it?
Well, tonight we expect that much talked about dinner with the heads of states who will be attending the funeral. I know also the Lesotho King Letsie is going to attend the funeral. Some of the royal members of the family on the continent. And also we know that tomorrow morning at 6, it will be the end of ordinary people paying their homage to the Queen. And then at around 11:35, that will be 11:35, it will be 12:35 South African time because they are an hour behind us. And the coffin will move from Westminster Hall, as you can see there, where the coffin is right now, gun carriage. And behind that gun carriage, you will have members of the family, that is the children, and also the grandchildren. And therefore, it will move to Westminster Abbey, where the service will commence. And after, it will then, the coffin will be taken to Westminster Castle, and that's where the final program will be. And thereafter, it will be the end of an era in terms of the Queen, not necessarily the monarch.
All right, thank you very much for that update. Again, Sophie Mukwena, international editor, SABC international editor, giving us the latest as in terms of what we can expect ahead of the Queen Elizabeth II's funeral that is taking place tomorrow. Again, the state funeral at Westminster Abbey happening tomorrow, one of the biggest single ceremonial events that is set to be staged in Britain since World War II. Again, dignitaries and presidents alike will be in attendance, and we will be covering it here on the SABC as it unfolds. Let's take another ad break. There is more on the other side. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. We continue in more news where Home Affairs Minister Motsoaledi has stressed the significance and benefits of attaining an identity document. It comes as the department continues to encourage citizens across the country to obtain their card IDs as part of properly documenting every citizen. Minister Motsoaledi is in Letebejane village outside Lebowa Khomo in Limpopo, handing over an ID to 103-year-old Gogo Malisela Mashilo. SABC News reporter Lutendo Bobodi has more on that story.
The purpose of the visit by the Minister Dr. Motsoaledi here in this village is, of course, to hand over an ID card to 103 old lady, Malisela Mashilo, who has applied this ID card like 2 or so years back, and he comes here on her birthday to hand it over to her. She lived 103 years old. She was talking about hearing about all the world wars, from the First World War, Second World War, and I think I should ask her about the secret to her longevity. But what is important here is the fact that this highlights the significance of attaining an ID. I mean, a 103-year-old attaining an ID, you know, she could have said, but I'm old, I'm an octogenarian, why should I get an ID? But she saw the importance of applying and getting that particular ID here, and the minister comes here on a birthday birthday present for her, and she hands it over to her. It's not only the 103-year-old Malisela Mashilo, there's also 2 others, one of them 99 years old. You know, the secret to longevity, I did not know, but let me just bring in the sister-in-law of Gogo Malisela Mashilo, and just get to know, just to gauge your mind, get to know what she feels about this particular visit. Melika Elena Kimang. Okay, li kwa jang Minister Mrena atlile mo utlisa ID who me Gogo Masilo Mamalisa.
Ke thabile thata se ke se bona mo go mamogula bana ke Mrena atlile mo re bone mehlolo a go dile go fitlhela mengwaga e 103 gomme a ke rea small card fela ke thabile thata ba di ba re bona botse se re bo bona ke re mamogolo gole re bona motlhole mo motseng wa le tebe jana botlhokwa ba mokhutwa se ke bo bona ya batho ba ke mishile go go latela batho feta lapeng ba dira nte e botse ga ka re thabile thata ke kwa ke le motlotlo go feta.
Okay, le yona pasa. Okay, a le ba le mathata ga le nyaka.
A se ke ba le mathata.
Okay, le jerning.
Oh, ma o tompalla.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Mkolisi. That's the sister-in-law to Gogo Malisela Mashilo, who's saying she's happy that the minister has come here. She also says she has her own ID card, and the time she applied for it, there were no difficulties.
Alutendo Bobodi, thank you very much. In Letebejani village in Limpopo, where Home Affairs Minister Motsoaledi is handing over a ID card to 103-year-old Gogo Malisela Mashilo. Thank you very much for that update. And now the news, the Nelson Mandela Bay Arts Festival is less than a week away and artists are more excited than ever. The 24 months under the cloud of COVID-19 pandemic left artists economically strained. But the festival is set to benefit local talent and promises to revive the art scene in the Bay. It will also showcase the rich art history embedded within the friendly city.
This 10-day multidisciplinary festival will showcase arts from across the spectrum. A number of venues around the metro will host the performances. The program includes 94 performances, as well as workshops and exhibitions.
We've been very concerned to do a multidisciplinary arts festival, so everybody can expect music, theatre, comedy, poetry, all sorts. Everything that you can think of will be part of the Mandela Bay Arts Festival. We also have some great workshops. We have wonderful exhibitions as well. So there really is something for everybody in the Mandela Bay Arts Festival.
Local artists are excited for the opportunity to get back on stage.
It means an opportunity for artists to feel like they are contributing, to the revenue of the city as well, to be proud owners of the city as well, to be part of economic activity, and also to be, part of the inspiration to change the moods and thoughts of our residents of Nelson Mandela Bay. So it's a big thing to be able to connect, to be in physical spaces with our audience. It's really great.
More than 90% of the jobs created during the festival is going to the Nelson Mandela Bay residents.
And also economically, the region will benefit. The hospitality industry, it will benefit as the program is in the whole metro.
80% of the ticket revenue will be paid directly over to the artists. The festival concludes on the 2nd of October. Kim Daniels, SABC News, Gqeberha.
Meanwhile, while the fuel retail sector is transforming with more black people owning service stations, this change is taking place at a snail's pace. There are fears that deregulation of fuel prices, as flagged by the government, will put brakes on the dreams of many. This is despite the industry having proven to be sustainable and resilient against many headwinds, including the COVID-19 pandemic and looting, amongst many others.
The fuel retail industry is attractive to many, and for the longest time black people couldn't own a service station. Now the picture has changed as they have some ownership stake in an industry where there are more than 5,000 service stations. But that's not enough. It's not cheap, and there are fears that deregulation will slow transformation gains made. Sibonelo Mbata is one of the owners who have a few sites to his name, and he's sending the elevator down to help people to own a site or two.
The reality is that it is not cheap, and so funding is probably the first or ranks number one in terms of the hindrances that every now and then people say, but how do we access funding? How do we access funding? So it has really been a challenge, but the industry itself, I think it's fairly sustainable, and I think it's quite resilient, and that we've seen over the past 2 years, even after COVID-19 and looting.
Even though the ownership structure looks different now, black entrepreneurs still face challenges such as access to infrastructure, finance and markets.
In the past, it was an open market. It was a willing buyer, willing seller. But I think as the transformation in the industry started taking traction, And there was always an issue around how do you determine the price? The seller wanted the maximum price they could get. The buyer wants the least they could pay. And so that is why we came in and with other industry stakeholders such as the Fuel Retailers Association and also the financial institutions. And it had to be determined that we need to have a formula which is an industry-wide formula right now, which is a 36-month EBITDA. This is so that's really basically how you determine the value of a service station. And of course, there will always be gray areas there and there, but the reality is that at least there is something that you can work off, as a starting point.
According to the South African Petroleum Industry Association, the fuel subsector contributes about 8% to the country's GDP, creating more than 700,000 direct and indirect job opportunities that make up 5% of total formal employment in the country. Karen Keelock, the National Franchise Manager at Nedbank Business Banking, says they're seeing an increase in particularly black women owning service stations. Having said that, the speed of transformation is still relatively slow.
I don't think it's moving fast enough. I think it's still very slow from where we're coming from. It's only in the last 2 years have I suddenly seen this upliftment coming through from the various oil companies. And I think that could be because government is starting to drive transformation within the fuel industry. But it is still very, very slow.
But as those who are already in it can tell you, it doesn't come cheap. One can expect to pay anything from 3 million rands up to 17 million rands for the most lavish site. Nedbank says it has already financed deals of more than 300 million.
We are now starting to see the BEE candidates are starting to come through now. We're starting to see the first, obviously, choice would be our lovely black ladies, and then we would look at our gentlemen. But the important thing is there's definitely this upliftment where we've seen, and even partnerships. So please just bear in mind, it's not all about the individual coming in and him or she having to run the site on their own. There's always that opportunity of partnering with the existing operator.
With all this progress having been made, both Mbata and Keelock say talk of deregulation is unsettling.
So that is why, the talk of deregulation is such a thorny issue right now, because it talks directly to the sustainability of this industry. Just to give you an idea, because many people always think that deregulation is good for consumers. The reality, however, is that you will understand how capitalist markets work. If we compete, I'm going to suffocate my competition. I'm going to eliminate competition. And once I've eliminated competition and I'm the only one, then I'm going to double my price, because consumers will have nowhere else to go because I've eliminated competition. And unfortunately, people, particularly in the far out, in the rural areas, will suffer the brunt of deregulation if that were to be implemented.
It will not work. Then we might actually fail in transformation, because a lot of our sites that we are doing and are funding are between the 6 and 10 million rand mark, even smaller. We're starting to see the 3 million sites coming in. If we're going to do transformation, and if we are serious about transformation, and the government wants to go deregulation, we must can it right now.
Astron Energy, formerly known as Caltex, operates the second largest petroleum retail network in the country, with over 850 service stations. Its head of retail, Tebogo Mekwa, says the group committed to placing more BE candidates at its sites.
We've got a very clear program that we've embarked on a couple of years ago, which we're obviously refreshing all the time. But we are very clear that there is a need for transformation within our network, especially for the sites that we own the properties at. So where we have better control of who operates those sites. When the contracts come to an end, we then use that opportunity to install a transformation candidate.
He says in the last 2 years, just under 20 transformation candidates have been placed at its existing sites of Astron.
Most of the time when you bring the transformation candidates, it's either they have never been in the oil industry before, We try and bring people with some entrepreneurial flair or some, experience in running businesses, because as much as they may not have the experience in running a forecourt, but we would like for them to have some entrepreneurial flair. And then we provide them with mentorship programs around just our specific industry and how to survive it.
Mekwa says to ensure success of a site lies in being fully present. He says the days of relying on the proximity of a site, hoping it will do well, are done and dusted. He says it is important to interact with consumers and understand their needs, as this is the only way one can stay in the game. Diabo Sito, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Do have a blessed week ahead. From myself, Liesl Wilson, and the team. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.